Okay, well, good noon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kelly Feehan, and I'm the Extension Educator for Horticulture. I'm located in Platte County, and you can reach out. There's my contact, there's my email. If you have additional questions later on, feel free to reach out to me or to any of the other three of my peers on here. So today is about, rainwater. Use it, don't lose it. And I know we haven't had a lot of rainwater the last few years. Hopefully we start to get a little bit more. But when we do get it, we want to make the best use of it. And that's kind of part of what this is about today, and helping to maybe to conserve some water. So I'll dive right in. So traditionally, a lot of what I'm going to talk about, it might sound like I'm talking more from an urban or a town perspective. And it maybe does apply a little bit more to that, but if you live out on an acreage or you live out on a farm, a lot of these, you can still use these practices and help conserve water. So keep an open mind there. But, traditionally, especially in towns, valuable rainwater is moved off property as quickly as possible. So, when they started paving over the soil and building buildings on top of the soil, it was, whoa, what are we going to do with all this stormwater? It can't soak in any longer. So we need to, do something with it. It's a nuisance. It's a waste. What do we do with it? And it was important. It was important that it didn't, flood streets or back up and get into basements. It doesn't pool and stand around and breed mosquitoes. All of that is important then, and it still is today. But civil engineers, developers were great at designing our communities to get that rainwater out of town as quick as possible. So, they can, the roof to the downspout to the pavement, curbs. I always tell everybody curbs are not there to show us where to park. They are specifically there to direct stormwater to a storm drain. And then when it goes into a storm drain, this is the other side of this storm drain. This is a small sandpit lake in Columbus. But almost all stormwater runoff or rainwater runoff from urban communities ends up in surface water someplace. Okay, so the idea there's kind of a renewed interest in rainwater. The main reason for the renewed interest was because when this flows off, it carries pollutants with it, soil sediments, pesticides, fertilizers, plant debris, and that's starting to impair some of our surface water. So this renewed interest is really to help address that issue, which is important. But from a water conservation standpoint, it's important too, and it can help with water conservation. And that's kind of what we're focused on today. So let's see, residential rainwater harvesting. Okay, just to make you aware, since I only have an hour today and I can't go into detail on a lot of it, we do have a NEB guide at Extension hubs.unl.edu on rainwater harvesting in residential landscapes. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is in this NEB guide, and maybe even goes into a little bit more in detail. So just be aware of that. But it basically, anytime we can increase infiltration into the soil, we're going to increase soil moisture and possibly go a little longer between having to irrigate the next time. So rainwater harvesting can be broken up into active rainwater harvesting. This is what most people think of when they think of rainwater harvesting. I'm going to put out a rain barrel or a cistern and I'm going to collect it. That's active rainwater harvesting. So you collect it and you hold it and you store it for later use. Okay, rain barrel cisterns would be an example. But I will also go into pretty good detail today, even more detail, about what's referred to as passive rainwater harvesting. And that's where you collect it or redirect it to infiltrate into soil during the rainstorm, or at least temporarily hold it to slowly infiltrate into soil. Okay, so you don't need a collection device or a storage device in this case. So the things I'm going to talk about, downspout redirection berms, bioswales, and I'll probably go into the most detail on rain gardens. So rain barrels, let's start there. Rain barrels are great. It's the first thing we think about. I always say it's not the it's not our grandmother's rain barrel. When I talk to kids about this, I say it's not your great or great great grandmother's rain barrel. But anyway, again, just let you know that we have some very detailed information on rainwater harvesting with rain barrels. I saw somebody said they'd like information on installing, on maintenance. I really didn't plan to go into detail on that because I'm talking more about the rain harvesting methods. But this NEB guide really does go into that. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll try to address a little bit there. If you want to build your own rain barrel, we have an EC2 that gives you great detail on how to build your own. But the rain barrel today, again, what I meant by it's not our grandmother's unit is, a lot of times that was just a barrel or a tank just sitting out in the middle of nowhere, wherever and open or close to a downspout or whatnot. But today's, we recommend that they have a cover. Again, just keeps a lot of debris out of there. That's one of the biggest issues with rain barrels is algae and whatnot building. So covers helps to keep that debris out of there. There's the safety of children possibly crawling into the water gets low and a squirrel falls into it, or neighbor's pet, a cat or something, and they can't get out. So the reason for the cover. And just keeping sunlight out too. They need a screen and a filter. And the screen and the filter is typically where the water goes into the rain barrel. Okay, and that's to keep some of that debris out from the roof. Okay, tree leaves, things like that. An inlet, again, where the water goes in. An outlet, you can't see it here, but it's usually a hose and a bib and a spigot. Hose bib with a spigot and a hose is typically what's used to get the water out. And then an overflow outlet. So by an overflow, well, let me talk about the limitations and how much rainwater we can collect from a roof, because that's why we need the overflow. But there's limitations on the amount they hold. That's probably the biggest limit to rain barrels. So how much? That we do have an equation for how much water you can estimate in gallons that will come off of your roof. So the equation is the collection area, so the square footage of the area, such as a roof or a portion of a roof, and you times that by the rainfall amount in inches, and then there's this conversion factor of 0.623. So the example, the conversion factor is this is about how many gallons they've estimated falls on 1 square foot of a roof during a 1-inch rain. Okay. So if you have a 1,200 square foot roof, probably somewhat small, maybe not, you can estimate in a 1-inch rain, that's close to 750 gallons of water that could potentially come off of that roof. And if that roof is situated so the water equally goes to 4 different downspouts, that probably doesn't happen very often, but if it did, that would be about 187 gallons per downspout. Most rain barrels are 50 to 55 gallons. Or at least under 100 gallons is what we define as a rain barrel. So that's why you need the overflow. So we don't want water, especially if they're close to the house, which they typically are because they're taking water from a downspout. So you don't want it overflowing and seeping into the basement or whatnot. So that's what we mean by the overflow. In this case, this is Prairie Loft in Hastings. So some people will join 2 or 3 rain barrels to increase the amount they can harvest. So again, this one would fill up. Once it's full, then it flows over here, and then this fills up, and if you have extra, it flows out. And you can't see here, but sometimes they'll put them up on a platform like this because it's a little bit easier to get the water out of the rain barrel. But there's a safety thing. A rain barrel this size full can weigh about 450 gallons. So that's a safety thing. And then you can't see it here, but these rain barrels are actually attached to this, to the building, so they couldn't accidentally be tipped over. So with that overflow, you want that overflow to go, directed to a planted area, more rainwater harvesting. So rather than someplace where it could easily run off into the street or someplace where plants aren't going to use it and infiltrate into soil. So in this case, the reason for this is a rain garden that's actually been installed. And the reason for the rocks or soil armor, because obviously you'd get a lot of erosion there. So those are some considerations. I'm gonna go back. You had asked a little bit about the maintenance on rain barrels. I wasn't going to go into it, but I'll kind of cover it. Maintenance really is just, observing them and monitoring them to make sure that, the filters at the inlet is not torn or whatnot. So too much debris is getting in there. The water's going in there. Your overflow is going where it needs to be. The largest maintenance is probably disconnecting them for the winter. And then they should be cleaned out fairly thoroughly. So when you're building the rain barrel or purchasing the rain barrel, you want to think about, how am I going to be able to clean this out on an annual basis? Because probably algae buildup in there. Even though you have a small screen on there, that keeps larger debris out, but it doesn't keep a lot of the dust and the sediment that comes off that roof. And, the other thing with algae is having a rain barrel that's not light, a darker colored rain barrel, because algae is promoted by the sediment, the like nitrogen in there, warm temperatures and light. So to reduce that algae growth, darker colored barrel, if it's feasible, put them where they're maybe shaded so that the water's a little cooler. You're still going to have to be cleaning those out at least once a year. That's the main maintenance. Okay, so I said the limitation with, excuse me. Okay, the limitations with those rain barrels is the amount you can collect and how feasible a lot of cisterns are for homes, for residential homes. That depends on your site and your location and where you are. But if they're 300 gallons or more, or 100 gallons or more, we consider them a cistern. These are 300 gallon sizes. And this is one that's at a school in Omaha, actually. And the first flush diverter, which is fairly common with cisterns, that helps to keep some of that debris and that sediment out there. And you can buy first flush diverters for rain barrels, or you can go online and find ways to build some yourself. But basically it diverts that first flush, that's the dirtiest. So in here, the water will go down here. And then that sediment, some of that sediment and soil can settle out, and the little bit cleaner water will then come out and start flowing into the cistern. So like I said, they're fairly common with cisterns, not available with rain barrels, but you can find them with first flush diverters or make your own. So using rain barrel water, that's on the safety thing. So most feasible is use the hose, put it in a watering can and use it to water our ornamentals, container plants, any flowers in our flower garden. Remember, again, it's a limited amount, especially if it's a rain barrel. And you don't need to use it for, maybe a week or longer after a rainfall before you need to actually start using it. But you're going to use it up pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind. Ideally, the common question we get is it safe to use water from a rain barrel to water our vegetables and fruits? Now, again, I think at one time, there are people that will wash their hair with rain water, and that's okay, but you got to take some precautions, and you'll find out why. So ideally, we'll say if you truly want to be very safe, there's no such thing as 100% safe, but if you truly want to be safe, you probably use a different source for your vegetables and fruits. Because research shows that roof runoff can have high levels of pathogens from bird poop, squirrel poop, even raccoon poop. They'll get up on roofs. So, and that's an example of where those pathogens, bacteria can come from. Zinc, a lot of our roofing materials already have zinc compounds in them. And then these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, so PAHs, which are naturally occurring. So when we burn coal, crude oil, gasoline, they're naturally occurring, they deposit, they settle out, get into our roofs and so on. And there's not a lot of science on it, but they could be or may be hazardous to human health in specific concentrations. And that's the reason we say ideally you might use other water than rainwater for vegetables and fruits. Limited studies, but in 2011, the Rutgers University did do a study on this and to try to help answer this question. So they used 12 rain barrels and then they collected the water about 3 to 7 days after a rainfall. That's typically when you would use it. You're probably not going to use it immediately after rainfall. And they did 6 collections. And they deemed that, with some precautions, yes, you can use rain barrel water to irrigate vegetables and herbs if you choose to, as long as you're aware of these safety precautions. So using best practices when applying it and some pathogen treatment. Best practices recommended, avoid getting harvested rainwater on the plant itself, or especially the edible portion. Try to apply it directly to the soil, which is just kind of a water conservation technique anyway. The roots is what need it, so apply it to the soil rather than the plant where it's going to evaporate off. Apply rainwater in the morning and do not harvest produce right after watering. That allows for leaf drying and some ultraviolet light disinfection. Or use those first flush diverters. They will keep out some of the debris. First flush diverters will not keep out pathogens. Okay, and that's probably mostly when they tested this water, that's probably most of what they found. About 100% of their samples had E. coli or pathogens in it. So that pathogen treatment, what do we mean by that? Well, treating rainwater with about a 3% bleach solution. So household unscented bleach, 5 to 6% chlorine solution added at a rate of 1/8 teaspoon of bleach per gallon of water. So a 55-gallon rain barrel, you'd need approximately 1 ounce of bleach added monthly. So frequent rainfall, you might want to increase that to twice a month. You want to wait 24 hours after adding bleach to allow that chlorine to dissipate before you use the rainwater. And do note, household bleach is not labeled for use in water treatment by the FDA, but it is frequently recommended for emergency disinfection, such as after our 2019 floods. We probably remember that. So hopefully that helps to address that question, and I've given you some information for safety. So on to some of the passive rainwater harvesting. So very simple downspout redirection. Where are the downspouts on your home directed? If they're directed onto pavement and then it goes into the street, can you redirect them, extend them, whatever, so they go onto a planted area? Slow it down, soak it in. Make the most of that rainfall when we do get it. However little amount it is. If it's directed to the soil where it can soak in, it's doing a lot more benefit than when it's running down the street. So obviously away from impermeable surfaces, and the reason we have downspouts is away from our home's foundation. This one, sometimes, they can be a tripping hazard. So this was our local Columbus Chamber of Commerce office, and we did some water-wise things there when they built a new one. So here, in this case, we actually cut out a section of the pavement, and this now has a metal covering, and right here it's a graded metal. So the water will flow in there and then flow underneath out to this planted area. So, and there's actually a neb guard on disconnecting downspout and impervious surfaces. This seems pretty simple, but they do talk about dry wells and some different things in here for actual impervious surfaces like a driveway. Using berms to redirect that runoff. So in the left-hand side here, this is, these higher berms were kind of a popular thing, but remember they can lose rainwater. So in this situation, it's actually a retail area. But when it rains or even when they irrigate, that water runs off into the pavement, into the street because of the design of this berm. So think about if you're going to use a berm, a little bit lower ones are a little bit more, they don't lose water or dry out quite as fast. So that's kind of a water conservation tip than the higher ones. But can you locate them? Well, they'll intercept rainwater, such as this one is between this downspout and the street. And that's what I mean by that example. I'm assuming you guys can see my cursor, so I'm using that instead of a pointer. This is just another example. Again, this is actually a rain garden, but a berm is used on the downside of a rain garden. So that's a berm, and this is the upflow of a lawn area. So the water is going in there. It's helping to collect and infiltrate some of that rainwater. Slow it down, soak it in, make a little bit better use of it. This, Dave Dykey with Ohio State University, he kind of coined this term, but I liked it. He calls these contour infiltration plantings, but it's basically a berm placed along a slope. So as that water is running down that slope, again, it intercepts it, it slows it down, it spreads it out and allows it to infiltrate rather than continuing down that slope and onto the pavement, especially in a little bit heavier rainfall. Just kind of think about, we have to analyze. I guess one of my last slide is about looking at just kind of analyzing, doing a site analysis of our garden and our landscapes, and knowing, when it rains, where does that rainwater go? And how could I use some of these practices just to help slow it down and soak it in? Bioswales are, they're typically a broad, shallow, kind of gently sloped, and usually vegetated. They can be, you can use rocks and whatnot in there, kind of like a stream bed or whatnot. Dry well would be maybe a term that would be used, but they're designed to convey, filter, and infiltrate water. So again, this was our chamber office, and we were using some water-wise demonstration practices. So you can see here from this angle, you can see we did include a berm along between the sidewalk and the rest of the turf. And that's buffalo grass, which is why it looks the way it looks. So the water flows out here, and again, it's angled to go down this way to a rain garden. But the majority, in lighter rainfalls, the majority of it is just going to infiltrate into the soil there. In a really heavy rainfall, it might be enough that it'll flow down to that rain garden. But if we didn't have that berm there, if it wasn't a swale here, okay, a lot of it in a heavier rainfall, especially if we just had the pavement, it could shoot across and onto the sidewalk and into the street. I like to share this photo, like not necessarily it's something that we can do as a homeowner, but this was a neighborhood in Lincoln, and this was called LID, or low impact development. So communities are starting to look at some ways to how can we slow down and soak in our stormwater. And again, a lot of this is to address that issue of runoff pollution and protecting surface water from runoff pollution. Cities, towns, 10,000 and larger are required to do this. And so in this neighborhood, this would be a swale. So, those hail strips where it's hard for us to grow. So it's grass sometimes because it's so hot and so dry and hard to irrigate. So in here, they have a swale here, very shallow, but it is a swale. And you'll notice there's no curbs. Okay, so the purpose of this is even the water from the street can run over to this area, depending on, the angle, but a lot of it will run down here too. And there's a wet retention area down here for the rainwater to run into. So there's an example of a swale. We might not think of this as a rainwater harvesting practice, but I think with our irrigation, we see a lot of water running off of our lawns, and that's because they can be compacted if we don't do a lot of core aeration, or if we're setting and forgetting our lawn irrigation system. So I think I need to at least say, don't overlook this very simple practice. I don't know how simple it is, but just, auditing your irrigation system and making sure some of those heads aren't hitting the street or the driveway on a regular basis. Make sure it's hitting the lawn where it can soak into the soil. And avoiding overwatering, so the soil doesn't remain too wet, and the soil, it can accept new water when we do irrigate, or it does rain. If it's wet, saturated, it's not going to infiltrate as readily, more will run off. And core aeration of lawns. If you're wondering what this water dog is, that's a program we do with our master gardeners on teaching them efficient irrigation. So core aeration of lawns, to me, that's a practice to help slow it down and soak it in, and maybe passively harvest some rainwater, but even especially irrigation water for conservation. So core aeration is removing those plugs to help relieve or reduce compaction. And in this photo, so the left side was not core aerated, the right side was core aerated. They kind of flood irrigated. And you can see how much more quickly on the right-hand side that water is infiltrating and disappearing. Okay, on to rain gardens. Is now, unless there's some questions you guys want me to answer now, or should we wait to the end? Maybe they're getting answered by you. That's great. Okay, once again, we have some great resources on rain gardens. Then 3 NEB guides: design, installing, and plant selection. We have an EC, an extension circular, this Nebraska Bioretention and Rain Garden Plant Guide. So it's full of plants, many, many plants. And then I like this rain garden design, this EC here. It's kind of interactive. So if you go to that online and you look at it, there's even embedded videos in there that you can watch. Tom Franti and Steve Rohde wrote this and put together these videos. So it really, and there's some worksheets in there that can help you with that design and that installation. So since I can only briefly cover it today, if you're really going to do it, maybe refer to these resources for some more in-depth information. So rain gardens, you may know this or probably know this, but they're gardens planted in shallow depressions or bowl-like. And they typically have a short berm on 1 to 3 sides to help collect and hold that rainwater. They're usually located and designed to catch and soak in rainwater in 24 to 48 hours. That's key. That rainwater needs to be gone in 48 hours if they're designed correctly. So this is a demonstration rain garden we have here in Columbus, and it takes water from this roof. There's a downspout here, and there's a downspout over here. So why didn't we extend it for this downspout? I share this to just remember to do that analysis of how this area is used. This is actually our football stadium in Pawnee Park here in Columbus. And when we were visiting with the park department individuals, we were kind of talking about where are we going to locate it. We were looking at all these downspouts, and they're like, oh, you can't extend it over here. And we're like, why? Because all the high school buses parked there, and all the football players run from the buses across this turf area. Now there's a sidewalk right there, but they skip the sidewalk and they run across the turf and into the locker room. Well, that's really important information for a rain garden because you don't want traffic in a rain garden. You don't want that soil to get compacted. And rain gardens are usually planted with deep-rooted, usually native plants, but adapted perennials do just as well. Ornamental grasses, shrubs is what we typically plant to. So here's a rain garden in Omaha, and this is what it's supposed to do. It can be a little scary the first time this happens, but if it's correctly designed and you get enough rainfall, the rain garden is supposed to fill evenly. And I'm going to emphasize that word evenly, and I'll talk more about it later, with rainwater. But the key is the water infiltrates and it's gone in at least a minimum of 48 hours, but less than 24 hours would be ideal. So rain gardens are not water gardens, bog gardens, ponds, or wetlands. The rainwater needs to be gone. We don't want them to be the plants that we put in there, the ones at the bottom, will tolerate that inundation for maybe 48 hours, but probably not longer. But we also specifically don't want these to breed mosquitoes or things like that. Mosquito breeding grounds, it takes about 7 to 12 days of standing stagnant water needed to hatch eggs. And I've heard some people say, well, maybe our rain gardens could even be a mosquito trap. We don't promote them for this purpose. But if eggs are laid in that water in that 24 to 48 hours and the garden dries out, the larvae can die. So that's what they mean by potentially even could be a mosquito trap. Rain gardens are not no maintenance, and they're not very high maintenance. It could be, but usually are not if they're done correctly. So they're about the same as any garden, but it kind of depends on the size, the location, your plant choices, how often, how much care the plant needs, how often it may need to be divided, just like any garden. So the rain garden components, what makes it different than a regular garden? Well, they have an inlet. Most of them they don't have to be located right next to a downspout, but a lot of them are. But they have to have an inlet, so an area where the water can get in. And that can be from, a downspout, or it could be from the upslope of a lawn, like a picture I showed you earlier with the berm. They have to have a basin, so kind of a shallow bowl area that's typically dug out a little deeper and created by the berm. You need to have well-drained soil, okay? So typically, I'll talk about doing a soil percolation or infiltration test to determine if your soil is well-drained. But you usually have to, good idea to do some amendment, like incorporating compost and some tillage to make sure you're relieving compaction and things such as that. You need a level bottom. Okay, we want that water to spread out evenly because then it'll infiltrate more evenly. If it's, if you get much deeper on the end, one end than the other end, it may not infiltrate in that less than 48 hours. You need an outlet. So this right here is the outlet. So, with extremes in our weather, it's not unusual for us to get these extreme weathery rain events, such as, 4 to 5 inches. I have a slide from 2021 where we had 4 inches in 30 minutes in Columbus. And the streets were flooded, the pictures I have. So you want to plan for those heavier rain events because they're more likely going to be happening more frequently. But if you want that excess water to be able to move out of the garden where you want it to move out of the garden, not break out a berm or something such as that. So typically the outlet is going to be opposite where the water comes in, and it usually has a soil armor on it as well. Plants, deep-rooted plants, and mulch cover. Especially initially, a lot of rain gardens are planted very dense because that helps with that infiltration. And the more plants, more evapotranspiration, so that helps with moving that water out of there after a heavier rainfall. So if you plant really dense, eventually you may not need that mulch cover. Key location points, obviously where it will collect rainwater, but just some pointers we recommend about 10 feet from the house or at least downslope of the home. Now I see a lot of rain gardens. The one I just showed you was right up against the foundation. I see a lot of rain gardens like that, but you do want to be careful of getting seepage in the basement. About 25 to 35 feet from a septic system or drain field, 50 feet from drinking water wells and utility lines. And these are some generalities, not where soils are poorly drained or water pools for long periods. I often have people say, oh, I have the perfect place for a rain garden. Every time it rains, the water flows there and I get this big pond and it just stands there for a while. That may not be the best place. You could potentially put it in there, but you're probably going to have to do some soil amending and some tillage, because if the water just stands there, it's probably not well drained enough. Water table at least 2 feet below soil. Not beneath or next to a tree. You're digging out that basin, so you're going to cause a lot of damage to that tree, those tree roots. And also if you have a lot of shade, it just limits the selection of plants that you can use in that rain garden. And a lot of our native deep-rooted things are full sun plants. It also, the shadier it is, you're going to reduce that evapotranspiration and just helping that water. Most of the water we want to infiltrate, but that evapotranspiration kind of helps with drawing down that water too a little bit. Along a gentle slope, ideal is less than 12% slope. I've seen these on very steep slopes, so it can be done, but it's more work and more time, and you usually have to bring in soil. And of course, be aware of rights of ways, underground service lines, utilities, ordinances, city ordinances, or homeowner association rules that might impact installation of a rain garden. Evaluating that soil, okay? So you want to do a percolation test. I think we should all do this anytime we install any landscape or any garden. I think it's a good idea to get to know our soil better, and about anything you read about any plant is it needs a well-drained soil. So this would be good knowledge for us to have, but it is especially important if you're going to put in a rain garden. So a percolation test, we recommend doing it in the spring or a typical rainy season. If you do it in the middle of July or August and that soil's very dry, chances are you're going to get a faster infiltration rate than you would in a typical rainy season. So we want to know that this water is going to infiltrate quickly enough, even when the soil's moist or wet. So you might want to pre-wet the soil if it's really dry. You just dig a hole about 6 to 10 inches deep, about 4 inches around, maybe 6 inches around at the most. You can put a yardstick in there if you want to monitor it on an hourly basis. And the minimum is you want about 1/4 of an inch per hour. Ideally, the water would go down 1/2 inch to 1 inch per hour. Now, if it's a little bit more poorly drained and it's really the only feasible place to put a rain garden, again, they'll do that soil amendment, some tillage and incorporation of compost. But also what they'll do is they might make the garden shallower than recommended. Plant those deep-rooted plants that are going to help mitigate that soil a little bit, channel it, increase infiltration over time. And then they'll maybe increase the height of the berm. So gradually, once the compaction is gone or you're getting better infiltration, you can increase the height of the berm and maybe collect more over time. So it's not impossible that if you have a poorly drained area that we couldn't do some mitigation, then you could put a rain garden there. And or you can, a lot of times what I've got to the point anymore where we'll dig the hole and fill it with water and I'll come back in 24 hours. And if it's gone, I know that area is okay for a rain garden. If it's a larger rain garden, especially, you want to do this percolation test in more than one area, the middle of the rain garden, maybe the ends of each of the rain garden. So calculating area drainings, this is what you need to do to determine the size. I feel like I skipped a slide here. But anyway, I think we can go on. So to determine the size that it's going to be, how big of a rain garden do you need and how deep should it be? You need to calculate the area that's going to be draining to it. Okay, so again, if it's a roof area, if it's one downspout in a roof area, obviously square foot, the length of the house by the width. Most houses have 4 downspouts. We don't know. You kind of have to do some guessing. But if they take 25%, approximately, 2,000 square foot divided by 4, you can assume that about 500 square feet is an estimate of how much is draining to the rain garden. And yes, today's roofs are probably not so simple. But this EC that I pointed out, it goes into estimating this roof area, especially even for different types of roofs and more complicated roofs. If you're only going to take runoff from a lawn area, again, just kind of stand where that rainwater garden will be, and you have to estimate what area of the lawn would be draining to this rain garden. And again, that length times width, and there is some guesswork into it. In general, though, we say that rain gardens will handle runoff from a hard surface about 3 times the rain garden size. That's just kind of a generality. In the rain garden neb guide, these are some design work. This is a design worksheet that's in that extension circular. But in the rain garden neb guide, we have this sizing factor. So basically, you determine that 500 square feet is going to be running off to your rain garden from your roof. And let's say you have a clayey soil, and the rain garden is going to be less than 30 feet from the downspout. Okay. And so then your sizing factor is 0.32. This is what this table or this chart gives you. Okay. So you would take the 500 square feet times the 0.32, and you need a minimum of 160 square foot garden, about 6 to 7 inches deep. So that's a very handy sizing chart that is in the neb guide, and I believe it's probably in the EC as well. So that would be the minimum size. It can be larger, but that would be the minimum size and depth that we would recommend to be able to handle the runoff from 500 square feet. Okay. So a typical residential rain garden, okay, that's going to be about, they're about 100 to 300 square feet. They're for a low berm on about 3 sides, anywhere from 4 to 8 inches deep. They can be up to 12 inches deep. I think in most residential home areas, they're not much deeper than that. They can be deeper. The one we have in Pawnee Park in Memorial Stadium is almost 2 feet deep. But again, that's fairly sandy soil, so the water drains pretty readily there. That level bottom, usually the longest side of the rain garden is going to be perpendicular to the downspout. Now, it doesn't have to be. You noticed the one I showed you, it was a fire station in Scotts Bluff, and you noticed that it was the opposite. The downspout was on the narrow end width. But it does not need to be an island. We show this picture when you read about rain gardens, you go online and read about them, we frequently see this little kidney bean shaped island out in the middle of the lawn. It does not need to be that. And for landscape design, it may not be the best. If that's what you like, it's fine. But it doesn't, if you can incorporate it into that landscape design. And here's an example. This is in Lincoln. And this portion right here is a rain garden that was added. So rather than being this kidney bean out in the middle, floating out in the middle of this lawn, it was incorporated into the landscape itself. I'd like to see, I shouldn't even say this, I'm biased. I'd like to see the rock disappear and more mulch go here as well. But that's up to the homeowner. So once you've decided the location and the size, you can, use spray paint or whatever, or pink string or whatever, and kind of do the outline. You're going to, if it's going to be in a lawn area, you're going to want to remove that sod. You might want to kill it first with glyphosate, just so you can kill those roots and you don't have a lot of that grass growing up and back into the rain garden as a weed. You could also use clear plastic. You can, if you don't want to use the glyphosate, you could lay down clear plastic, and the heat buildup underneath there eventually or gradually will kill that grass. I think I talked about this program last week, and John, I think you were right. You said it'd probably take about 30 to 40 days, depending on how hot it gets. So it depends on, in the spring, it's going to take longer because it's not going to get as much heat underneath there. But that is an option for people that, if you don't want to remove the sod. This was a large rain garden in Norfolk, and they actually came in with a sod cutter and removed it and reused that sod someplace else. So you've done that. It's time to create the basin. Call Digger's Hotline. Call 811. They'll come out. They'll put in the flags for underground utilities and so on. I always say take pictures of those flags, because I think I'm going to remember where they are and then I forget. So I've taken pictures of where mine are located in my yard. The tools you're going to need: shovel, rake, digging fork, a wheelbarrow to move that soil around, tape measure. Some things we don't typically use installing a rain garden is a string and 2-foot long wood stakes. I'll show you why. A string and a carpenter level for that level bottom. And then we use a plywood board for this purpose. So as you're digging, that's how you're going to create your berms. You're going to keep that soil on the downslope side of the rain garden. And you might, in many cases, what you're digging out is enough soil. You might have to get rid of some of the soil if you have too much. Maybe if you have a pretty good slope, you might have to even bring in some soil. After digging, that's when you'd want to spread and incorporate that compost. If necessary, do some tillage to incorporate that compost and maybe help relieve or break up some compaction. Then you check, you rake it all, and then you check if the level is bottom. So you just take your piece of wood and your level and you place it in different areas around the rain garden. You want it to be as level as possible. The string and the string level is, so again, it's level from your inlet to your overflow. And that's where you use the stake. Put the stake on one end, you put the other stake where your overflow is going to be, and then you want to have it level. The overflow, again, that's where that excess water can flow out of the garden when we have those, extreme heavy rainfalls. And again, what we do is after we've created the berm, then we'll usually just maybe remove 3-4 inches of the berm. We want it to be in an area often opposite where the inlet is. Okay. And once you dig that little 3-4 inches out, lay down some landscape fabric, and we put some rock or whatnot on it for soil armor. And, how are you going to get the rainwater into the garden? And a lot of people will use a downspout extension. You have to remove it every time you mow. That's why we sometimes say it's nice if these rain gardens can be incorporated as part of the landscape rather than kind of this floating island where the lawn is around it and you have to step over it or move it to mow it. You can do that. That's okay. But there's some, more creative ways that you can get it in there. The swale, we haven't installed the rain garden down here, but this is where we put a rain garden in our chamber office. And so this swale, again, the swale from this downspout goes into the rain garden. But when the rain's a little bit heavier, this swale is sloped down to the rain garden. So we do get some runoff here as well. That's the two ways that we get rainwater in. This is one of my master gardeners we installed as master of the group of us. He wanted a rain garden, so we kind of all went over there and worked together to install it, to learn about it. And he chose to just create a little grass swale rather than extending the downspout all the way out. He actually dug out a little grass swale. And then he still had a short downspout, but then the water flowed down into the rain garden. Some of it infiltrated, if it was a very heavy, light enough rain, some of it infiltrated into the soil before it got to the rain garden, and that's okay. This is UNO Zenith House rain garden. You can also pipe it underground to the rain garden. A little bit more work, but not a ton of work. But you can see where it's the downspout is going into the pipe, into the ground. It comes over here, and this is where it daylights, where I have that blue area. So that's actually coming from this downspout. In this, where there's a sloped area, they also put in this kind of a rocked swale with a slope, and that's another way that the rain garden is, the water is flowing into this rain garden. So there's some creative ways or different ways that you can direct that rainwater into the rain garden. Again, if you're here, they had to estimate for the size of the rain garden, they had to estimate the square footage of the house as well as the square footage of the area that might be bringing rainwater from here. So it was coming from two different locations. Planting, plants, ideally not seeds, because you can imagine if you put in a bunch of seeds and then it get a heavy rain, and that seed's all going to float and move around. If it's a large area, plugs are sometimes more economical, or just smaller transplants, smaller plants. We do recommend initially after planting is to, especially if you have a downspout directed into that rain garden, maybe remove that downspout or at least block the inlet, at least until those plants can get established a little bit. So if you get a heavy rain, again, even with plants, it can uproot them and slow down that establishment. And of course, mulch, you want to use mulch initially for weed control. You don't want to be walking in. Rain gardens are not strolling gardens. They're not gardens that you want to stay out of as much as possible. And so you want to have that mulch in there so you don't have to be going in there and walking on the soil and compacting it, especially a wetter soil, and creating compaction. Plant selection, getting close to the end here. Remember, the difference from other gardens is there's 3 moisture zones. Okay, there's the top of those berms, there's the sides, and then there's kind of the bottom of the berm where in heavier rainfall, you could get inundation. You're going to get standing water, so you need plants. And we've come up with a list of plants that handle that wetter soils, those wetter roots, and that inundation. So again, bottom plants, they're able to tolerate those short periods of cooling water and hopefully frequent enough rainfall that you have a moist, continuously moist soil. The last few years, that probably didn't happen. Last few years, they probably had to supplement irrigate some of these rain gardens. Top of the berm, again, probably a little bit more drought tolerant plants. And the sides of the berm are kind of in between. It depends on the garden and how deep it is. Sometimes those sides are pretty shallow, so you really want those. They might have to tolerate some short periods of cooling water as well. Deep-rooted plants, those deep-rooted native plants, those roots grow deeper. They die, they regrow, they create that channel. They help improve that infiltration over time. And deep-rooted plants are just a little bit more. They're more drought tolerant. So if you don't want to irrigate in the really, really dry periods, those deep-rooted plants are going to withstand longer periods of drought in between rainfall. And with any garden, you got to consider that height, bloom time, color. It has to be pleasing to the gardener. And remember, shorter plants are less likely to flop. In rain gardens with that wet soil, sometimes plants that are overwatered are the plants that are going to be more likely to flop. So smaller plants can do that. I have Joe Pye weed is the picture down here at the bottom. I have yet to see that one flop. So even though it gets 3 feet to 6 feet tall, So some plants are just not prone to flopping. Plants that are workhorses for the bottom. This is just the experience with installing rain gardens in Omaha and Lincoln. Again, swamp milkweed, pink turtlehead, the carex, lots of sedges. Palm sedge is one that's been very commonly used, but it does kind of get to be a little bit of a nuisance. It really spreads, kind of takes over that rain garden. If you like it, fine. But look at, there's so many new carexes on the market. So this one is brown fox sedge, and I really like that one. Joe pie weed, Virginia wild rye, helenium, or what's known as sneezeweed. These are all plants that have been proven in rain gardens in Nebraska to do well for the bottom. Some others, Virginia mountain mint, prairie blazing star, Monet moment, bee balm, spiderwort, golden Alexander. These are just some additional ones. I'm going to zip through this. This I know we're recording this, so if you want to come back to these, but these are ones that take moderate abuse, and they're better for the sides. Aster, coneflower, iris. Siberian iris is used quite a bit in rain gardens. Cranesville geranium, prairie fox, and our penstemon, especially the penstemon, would be probably more for the top or the side areas that don't get inundated. Some other different ones, Himalayan border jewel, Solomon seal would be better for shady parts of the rain garden. Prairie coneflower, black-eyed Susan, spiderwort can go on the side or near the bottom. Switchgrass is a grass that will tolerate the bottom as well as the sides. Here's probably an important slide. Sometimes it's better to know what you shouldn't use. These are plants to avoid from experience. They either just haven't worked well, they haven't grown well, or they became a problem, kind of a nuisance, like horsetail rush. And interestingly, chelone, pink chelone does great. White chelone, for some reason, it's kind of hit or miss. Doesn't seem to do as well. Maintaining, just probably monitor it during and after rain. Watch for eroded soil. If you do have extremely heavy rainfalls, make sure the overflow is working like it's supposed to. You might have to clean sediment from the opening. Sometimes sediment will get built up there, and over time that can actually divert the rain around the rain garden. So you want to make sure that's not happening. Otherwise, it's your typical weeding. Use your mulch, 3 to 4 inches. So you don't have to be in there weeding as much and the traffic and compacting the soil. Tree seedlings love to grow. So get them pulled out before they get too big of roots. So I'm going to go on moving or replacing plants just like any garden division when needed. So that site analysis, just kind of do a property sketch. How does rainwater flow over your property? Go out while it's raining. If it's not lightning, where is it flowing? Where does it go? Where is it ending up? Can you use any of these practices to capture and reuse it, capture and store it, or capture and infiltrate it shortly during or shortly after a rainfall?